This video was produced in order to demonstrate a number of common problems and issues that arise during the mediation process. Although there are many ways to conduct a mediation, the simulated mediation you are about to see is based on the 7-stage model. The tape can be used in part or in its entirety during a mediation training program and can serve as the focus for discussions on how to respond to problems that mediators may encounter.
Good afternoon. My name is Eileen Pruitt. I'm the mediator who's going to be conducting the mediation this afternoon. First of all, I want to tell you both how much I appreciate your coming in for the mediation today, and just make sure that the information I have about you is correct. I show that you're Janet Armstrong?
That's right.
And how would you like to be called?
I'd like you to call me Mrs. Armstrong.
Okay, Mrs. Armstrong. And you're Ron Baker?
That's correct.
And how would you like to be called?
Just Ron is fine.
Okay, and as I told you, my name is Eileen Pruitt, and since Mrs. Armstrong would like to be called Mrs. Armstrong, if you'll call me Miss Pruitt, and I'll call you Mr. Baker. Is that okay?
Sure.
I'd also like to explain a little bit about the mediation process that we're here for this afternoon. Mediation is a process in which the two of you have come together to present and discuss the problem or dispute that's going on right now. We're going to try and define and clarify the issues that face you both, and then you'll have the opportunity to discuss and present options for resolving the conflict or the dispute. Do either of you have any questions about what it is we're going to do in the mediation?
I do. After you tell us who's right or who's wrong, then what do we do?
Okay, what's going to happen today is that you and Mr. Baker are going to have an opportunity to present what's going on and what it is that would resolve the dispute for you. My role as the mediator is to act as a neutral and to facilitate that discussion and the exploration of the options that are open to you. I'm not really here to make a decision. Any decisions that are made are going to be made by you, Mrs. Armstrong, or you, Mr. Baker. Okay? Since we're here to do a mediation and to go through this structured process, it's important that some ground rules are set forth. They're really the rules of common courtesy, but there are a couple of specific things that I'm going to ask you to abide to in terms of rules, just to help me as the mediator understand what's going on. The first one is that I'm going to ask that only one person talk at a time, and while the other person's talking, it's important that the other person listen and hear what's being said. Is that okay with you, Mrs. Armstrong?
Oh, that's fine.
Mr.
Yes.
Baker, is that okay with you?
I don't have any problem with the rules, but I guess I'm concerned. I don't see where we're going to get any place today because I really don't feel that she's going to be cooperative. I mean, the rules are all right if we're going to do this, but I have some real doubts about it.
Well, I think that it's natural when people are entering into a new process or a new mechanism to try and resolve a dispute that they might be a little uncomfortable or think that it's not going to work out. But actually, I think as we go through this, if you give it a chance, be careful to listen to her, and I'm sure she'll be careful to listen to you, that there are some real possibilities for working through it, and we just need to give it a chance. Is that okay?
Let's see what happens.
Is that okay with you? The second ground rule is that in order to facilitate the communication and make sure that we all understand what's going on, if initially you could both speak directly to me and not to each other, that would help me understand what's going on. Is that okay with you, Mr. Baker?
Sure.
That's all right. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I want you both to know that for purposes of this mediation, I will hold everything that you say to me as confidential. That means I'm not going to take anything that's said out of this room, and I would hope that you would both agree to do the same. I may take some notes if there are some things that are confusing me or I have questions, but I want you to know that I would destroy those at the end of the mediation, and they're only for my benefit during the mediation. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. The other thing I wanted to mention briefly is that sometimes in the mediation, it's helpful for me to caucus with each of you individually. A caucus is a little private meeting outside of the mediation, and it has its own rules. One is that anything you tell me in caucus is confidential and won't be revealed to the other side unless I have your permission. And that if I meet with one of you in caucus, I will also meet with the other one. Is that okay?
Sure.
We don't know whether we'll need to do that, but we might. Okay. At this point, it's going to be helpful to me and helpful to the mediation process if I hear from both of you what's going on and what brought you here today. I'd like to know from you who'd like to go first.
Well, I'm going to go first.
Is that okay?
I think she should. She's
Okay.
the one. She's the reason we're
yes.
here.
Okay, Mrs. Armstrong, why don't you tell me about what brought you here today?
Well, the main thing is I own some property, and I rent it. It's half a house, and he lives on the other side with his family. And they haven't paid the rent for last month, and they're 6 days late already, and I have to have that to pay my mortgage. My husband died. He didn't leave me hardly anything at all. I'm having a very, very tough time. He just didn't make any provisions to take care of me. And now I'm supposed to run this whole property by myself, and I have a $750 mortgage, and I've had to dip into my savings to take care of that because they're not paying the rent. I just want them out. I want the rent paid, and I want them to go.
Okay, Mrs. Armstrong, it sounds to me like you're concerned about a number of things. What you're telling me is that Mr. Baker and his family are tenants in a house that you live on one side and they live on the other?
Right,
Is that
yes,
right?
that's right.
And that last month's rent hasn't been paid. How much was that?
Well, the rent is $450 a month.
Okay, and this month's rent has not yet been paid, and it's 6 days overdue.
Yes, it's been 6 days.
And you're telling me also that you're a widow, and it sounds like you have some concerns about being a landlord as well?
Well, I wouldn't if it weren't for them. I'd like some good tenants, people that paid on time.
Okay, what are your concerns about the tenants specifically, aside from the rent?
I just want him out, that's all. I just want him out. I want to get new tenants.
Okay.
I'm uncomfortable.
I can tell that you're uncomfortable. And if you wanted to sit back and face me a little bit so I can talk to you and try and get a clear picture of what's going on.
You know, I don't like being here.
Okay, I understand that. And as I told you at the very beginning, mediation is a voluntary process. And nobody's going to force you to be here. But I think if maybe we could both take a deep breath and you could start over again. I hear you saying things about the rent and about wanting them out, but it sounds to me like there are other concerns as well. Can you be a little more specific?
I don't like his attitude.
You don't like Mr. Baker's attitude?
I don't like Mr. Baker's attitude. It's not proper.
Okay,
I don't have to put up with it.
What do you mean by not proper?
Well, to be perfectly frank with you, ever since he moved in and ever since my poor husband died, the man has been making advances to me.
Oh,
He's
that's
been
absurd.
absolutely coming after me. I will absolutely not put up with that.
Okay,
my
Mrs.
husband is
I don't
only
have
been
to
dead
stay here.
9
Mr.
months.
Baker, I asked
do not
you-
I am
have
a
to stay
poor
here
widow.
and put up with this.
I have no defense against
Mrs.
this man.
Armstrong.
He's twice as big as I am.
See what I
Could you be
mean?
quiet for a second?
Excuse me.
Mr. Baker, I asked you both to agree to 2 ground rules. One of them was that you'd only talk to me, and the other one was that you wouldn't interrupt each other.
I was talking. I was not interrupting.
I understand that, but I want you to talk only to me and not to him. There are always situations that make us upset or angry. We might not like what we hear. But one of the things that we're going to do in the mediation is give each of you the opportunity to tell me everything you want to tell me. And if the other one can just sit back and listen, you're going to have the same opportunity. Okay?
Okay.
Is it okay with you?
I think so.
Okay. Now let me summarize because I want to make sure that I understand what it is you're telling me. What you're saying, Mrs. Armstrong, is that since your husband died, you've continued to rent that other half of your house to Mr. Baker and his family. Is that right?
Yes.
And the rent is $450 a month.
Yes.
And it hasn't been paid for the last 2 months.
And the water bill.
Okay, there's an additional concern about the water bill?
Yes.
And what's that?
Well, the water's gone up. I don't know what they're doing with it. I suppose the children are making messes all over the house. The water bill is $20 more a month. That is just a waste of water, and these days we can't afford that. But absolutely, it's just, the way they live is just not good.
Okay, so in addition to the concern about the rent, you have a concern about a $20 increase per month in the water bill.
Every month.
And the other thing that you mentioned that I need to hear about to know where you're coming from is your perception and your feeling that seems to be very strong that Mr. Baker's done something improper in approaching you.
Yes,
Can you tell me about that?
After my husband died, this man suddenly got the idea he could just walk into my house any old time and come right up to me right through the door like that. I will not have it. I will call the police if he does that one more time. I know what he's up to. I know what he wants.
Okay, so your concern is based in the fact that when he comes to your house, he comes right in. Is that what you're saying?
He walks right in. He knows I'm a widow. He knows I'm a woman alone. He knows I'm defenseless. And he walks right in, as bold as you please.
Okay, and what do you mean by walking right in? That he doesn't knock?
Well, he knocks. He knocks and then he walks in. He does not wait for me to come to the door.
Okay. And that's a real concern for you?
Yes.
Okay. So we have the rent, the water bill issue, and the real concern that you feel about him coming into your house without waiting for you to answer the door.
He's making advances to me.
And you believe he's making advances by doing that?
I know that he is, yes.
Okay. Is there anything else?
I don't think so.
What's your perspective on the problem?
I don't know where to start. You know, when I came here to talk about the rent, and that was it. I've never heard she wanted us out before. I've never heard these other absurd allegations that she's making. Let me tell you about being there. We moved in because this house is close to my work and close to my son's school. I have a son, 17. He's a good athlete. He's an honor roll student, National Honor Society. And the nature of my work, I work third shift. The nature of it is I don't get to spend enough time with him or my family anyway. So we moved there to maximize the time that I have. And as a matter of fact, last week, for the first time, I got an opportunity to see him play ball. He's been playing all season, first time. And you know, he's great. He hits well. He's an all-around athlete. It gave us a chance where we were. Last summer was the first time I ever had a chance to take them on a vacation for more than 2 weeks.
Mr. Baker, as I heard you say initially, you're here today because you were concerned about the rent, and you heard Mrs. Armstrong's concerns about that, and you're now telling me that it's really convenient and you like living at this particular address, so you're concerned about her desire that you move out. And one of the reasons that it's convenient for you is that it gives you a chance to spend more time with your son. And you've been telling me about some of his activities. Can you tell me a little more about the problems with the house?
Well, the only thing I would say different from what you said is I like living there, but it's not as nice to live there now since Charles died. I mean, her husband was one of those people that was just neat to get along with. He was the one that suggested the vacation in the first place. I mean, he gave us the place. We went to the Grand Canyon. We had over a week, which is the longest our families had forever, to spend some time together. It's really, he was a nice person, and he understood having a quality of life with your family and that sort of thing. So I really think that it's not going to be as nice now, but we don't want to move. We still like where we are there, but I don't know. When I hear this kind of stuff and allegations about it, it's just absurd. And I don't even know why I'm here when it's in that kind of an atmosphere.
I don't know why he calls it an allegation. This is something that actually happened.
It's an absurd allegation.
Okay,
It's not
Mrs.
absurd
Armstrong, you both agreed that only one person would talk at a time.
And I listen to you.
Okay.
That you can
I
do
am
the
listening
least.
to you.
Well,
Mr. Baker, I'm going to ask you to be quiet while I'm talking to Mrs. Armstrong. Okay. You had an opportunity to talk. You'll get another opportunity to talk. I'm not going to foreclose anybody from saying what they want to say, but it's really important to the process that I hear from you one at a time. Can you agree to those rules again?
Yes, you must understand it's very difficult to hear those things.
I understand what you're telling me, and we're all aware of the feelings that both parties have, and we're going to deal with that as we can, but we're going to do it through the structured process that we've set up, okay? Okay, Mr. Baker, I'd appreciate the same courtesy from you.
okay.
Now, what you're telling me, in addition to the problem with the rent and liking living there and that you had a good relationship with Mrs. Armstrong's husband, is that you want to continue to live there. Now, what else is going on?
Well, let's talk about the rent first. I mean, I owe the rent. There's no question. But I owe the rent because we've got problems that needed taken care of since soon after her husband died, and I can't talk to the woman. I've gone over twice trying to get her to listen to the problems we have. The garbage disposal is absolutely useless. It backs up in the kitchen. It won't let anything go down it. Water comes up and stands there and smells. The upstairs bathroom...
That's a brand new garbage disposal.
Okay, if you can just wait a couple of seconds. If you'd like me to give you paper and a pen so you could write down your thoughts, I'd be willing to do that.
No, I appreciate that. I can listen.
Okay, thank you.
The upstairs bathroom was a drip, and now the faucet is so bad it's just an absolute leak. The water runs, you know, there's enough water comes out of that thing to fill a reservoir. And I went over to try to work out some way with her to get these repaired. After all, I know it's rough for a woman, but nonetheless, she's now the landlord and she has some responsibility in these. And as for this thing about making a pass at her, I've only been to her house twice. I did exactly the same thing as I did when her husband was alive. When Charles was there, I'd go over once a week at least, and I would knock on the door. If he was there, I see him, then I'd walk in. I wouldn't walk into somebody's house if they weren't there. I went twice to her house to talk about this. I knocked on the door and walked in exactly the same way I would have if Charles was there. And she wouldn't even listen to him. She wouldn't listen about either of these issues.
Okay. You're saying that the rent has not been paid and that there are two problems in particular that are of concern to you and are related to the rent not being paid.
That's
one of
right.
which is the garbage disposal not working in the kitchen, and the other one is a significant leak in the faucet in the upstairs bathroom.
That's correct.
You're also telling me that you don't feel that your approach to dealing with her is any different from the way you dealt with her husband before he died.
Exactly.
And that you would like to see the repair issues dealt with, and that you feel you've made efforts to do that and they haven't been met with any cooperation at this point.
That's exactly right.
Okay, is there anything else?
No, I don't think of anything right now.
Okay, I've heard from both of you and summarized for both of you, and I'd like at this point to attempt to frame the issues and talk about the issues that are here for you to resolve. There are a couple of them that are pretty obvious. One is that you've both talked about the rent that needs to be paid. There's the issue of the water bill and the issue of the garbage disposal and the faucet that need repairing. And there's the issue of, that can be, I think, broadly phrased as the way you communicate and the way you deal with each other as landlord and tenant. Is that a pretty fair description of the issues for you, Mrs. Armstrong?
It's close, except for the children.
Okay, what about the children?
Well, his son he's a big kid, and he has some big rowdy friends, and they were playing basketball, and his son broke a window.
Oh,
my
yeah.
front
That's-
window with his basketball. He broke it. I know he did, and I had to pay for that.
Okay.
$35.
Okay, so what I hear you saying, an additional problem is that we want to put on the table to resolve is that you had a broken window and you believe that his son Christopher did it. Is that correct?
I know his son did it.
Okay, and
If my son had done it, we have a good enough relationship, he would have told me. He was not brought up that way.
okay, Mr. Baker, I want you to talk to me right now. You've heard what Mrs. Armstrong said. It sounds to me like you're disputing that there is a
You
concern.
better believe
that
it.
You don't think your son did it. Okay. Is it still fair to say, however, that we now have an additional issue to place on the table, which is that there is a problem of a broken window, no matter who did it? Is that an issue that needs to be resolved?
Her window is not broken. It's there. There's no broken window. I came out of the same house today.
Okay.
I'm talking directly to you, but I want to say the window is not broken because I repaired it at my own expense.
Okay, so you had the window repaired already, and you think this happened at a time when Christopher was out in the yard with his friends?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. And
If she thought, and I'm talking to you too, if she thought that my son did it, why wouldn't she have told me or my wife that? We've never heard a thing about that.
okay, I think that those are issues that you can both discuss as we go forward. I guess what I want to say at this point is that if we can agree that there is an issue in dispute, that there's an issue to talk about of the broken window, can we go forward and do that even though you don't agree on who did it or how it happened? Is that okay with you? Okay with you?
I guess.
So we'd now like to hear some discussion of how to resolve issues involving the rent, repairs that need to be made, the water bill, and the broken window. Is there anything else?
Not from my perspective, it's not.
No, that's all from mine.
I've heard from both of you. We've summarized and we've explained the issues, and at this point it's time for your real work as the parties to the mediation to begin. That's because we're going to generate the alternatives from which you may select a way to resolve the dispute. Since Mrs. Armstrong began, I'm going to ask her to go first again and tell us about what she would like to have happen to resolve the dispute. Is that okay with you?
Sure.
Mrs. Armstrong, what do you propose?
I'd like to have the rent paid now because I've had to go into my savings to pay the mortgage, and I do need that. I understand from listening to Mr. Baker that the water bill isn't his fault, and I'm certainly willing to discount that.
Okay, so what you're proposing is that the rent be paid and that you will continue to take care of the water bill without any adjustment or any problem from him. Is there anything else?
No, I think that's for now. That's where I'll start.
Okay. Mr. Baker, you've heard Mrs. Armstrong propose that the rent be paid and that she will take care of the water bill and not deal with you on any problem with that. What do you propose?
Well, the rent's not the problem. As I said, that is a symptom. I've got the money to pay the rent today, but I wouldn't pay the rent before until we dealt with these two problems of the garbage disposal and the faucet, and I don't see where that's any different. Now, if there's some way to deal with those, I would even suggest if she'll give me credit for what they cost. I checked the cost. Garbage disposal, $70. The faucet's $30. So if she'll give me a $100 credit, I'll put them in. Not charged for putting them in, but I'm not going to do it out of my own. And the bigger issue in my mind is, are we off this us having to move out? Because if we have to move out, I'm not going to pay any of it. If that's the case, I got to save my money to move someplace else.
Okay, so what you're saying is that you're willing to pay the rent, you're willing to do the work on repairing the two items that need repair and get a credit for that, but your agreement to that is conditioned upon knowing that you don't have to move out.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Okay, Mrs. Armstrong, you've heard Mr. Baker's proposal, which is that he's willing to pay the rent, but he'd like to have some arrangement made for dealing with the repair of the garbage disposal and the water faucet upstairs, and he needs to know that you're not going to require him to move out. How does that sound to you?
Well, I'm agreeable that he can fix the faucets, and I will give him credit for that. But I don't understand why I would give him credit for something that's brand new that I just put in and that works perfectly fine.
Okay, and what's that item?
That's the garbage disposal.
Okay, tell me about the garbage disposal.
That was just put in several months ago, just before my husband died. And it was brand new. It's a high-quality garbage disposal. I'm afraid if there's a problem with it, it's something that his family has done, and I don't want to give him credit for fixing something that he broke.
Okay, so what you're saying at this point is that you'll accept $900 less the amount that it would cost to replace the faucets, which is $30.
Exactly.
So you still want $870.
Yes.
Because you're not convinced that the garbage disposal is not working right.
Right.
Okay, Mr. Baker, you've heard Mrs. Armstrong. Her proposal at this point is that she's willing and accepts your offer to replace the upstairs faucet at a cost of $30, and you can have a credit on that, but that the disposal was just put in and she's not willing to accept that it needs replacement at $70 right now.
I don't know how you can say accept an offer when I, in good faith, offer to put it in, both of them in, at my own expense. I guess the easiest way is to come and look. I got water standing in that thing right now. If the smell will run you out, whatever the reason is, it is the landlord's obligation. And if we don't solve it here, there are places that won't let you have that kind of standing water. I guess I got to call them. But I'm not going to deal with this situation until both of them are fixed. And I've gone more than my share of the way by saying I do it of my own expense, for my own time and effort.
Okay, and that's been communicated to Mrs. Armstrong, and I'm sure she appreciates that. What are you proposing at this point?
Fix them both. Let her come look at it. If I'm lying, then obviously you don't have to do it. If she can make it run, more power to her. But she can come over, and right now there's water in there, and you turn it on, and it won't go down. And more water will come in tonight when whatever, the water table backs up or whatever happens.
Okay, so what you're proposing is that you make an agreement for you to replace both the faucet and the disposal if when she sees the sink with the disposal in it that's not working, she agrees that it's not working and it needs to be replaced.
Yeah, that sounds fair.
Okay. You've heard what Mr. Baker said about the fact that there's standing water right now, and he'd like you to come and look at the situation, and if it's as he describes it, then go ahead and go with his original proposal, which is that he pay you $800 and replace both the faucet and the disposal.
I'm willing to come and look at it, but I want, I'm not going to go over there with him alone. I'm sorry. I don't feel comfortable around him. I would like his wife there. I'd like her to come over and walk over with me, and then I'd be willing to do that. And I also want to ascertain that this was not damaged by them. I don't want to find a tinker toy in it or something, if there is any damage.
Okay, it sounds to me like we're discussing two issues at this point. We've discussed the rent. We're now discussing a mechanism or a way for the two of you to make a fair assessment of the garbage disposal condition, and you're naming for me some criteria that you want to see
Right.
to make your decision that you're going to give him the $100 credit. So that if they didn't cause the damage, it's not apparent to you that it was their causing it, and that it's clearly apparent that it's not working and is
Yes.
creating a problem, you're willing to give them the credit for the replacement of that.
Then I would give them the credit.
Okay, it also sounds to me like you're discussing and want to get a decision from the two of you on the issue of how you're going to deal with each other as landlord and tenant. And what I hear you saying is that you'd like to have Mrs. Baker involved.
I would feel much better.
Okay. Let me take that to him and see what he says about that, okay? Mr. Baker, you've heard what Mrs. Armstrong has said. How do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, she can look at it. I don't have a problem with that. 17-year-old son is not going to put Tinker toys in the garbage disposal, so that's acceptable. And on the other count, I guess I can understand maybe that I've intimidated her somewhat, but I certainly have no problem with my wife being involved. I think, in light of what's been said here, I'd really like that, but I would like to explain. The only thing I ever did in going to her house was to treat her the same way I always treated her husband. I think she'd even admit her husband and I had a good relationship, and I would come over at least once a week, knock on the door, and he would be there and I would go in, and we would talk about the house, but we'd talk about everything else too. So if that, I can understand how that might be hard for her to accept. So any contact I have will be with my wife with me. That's not a problem at all.
Okay, so your proposal is for her to come over to the house when you and your wife are both
Right.
there, look at the disposal, and that in the future, in order to make her more comfortable with dealing with you, that you'll include your wife in all those conversations about concerns or problems with the property.
That's fine. That's fine.
And that's what you're suggesting at this point. Okay. Mrs. Armstrong, you've heard what Mr. Baker says. How does that sound to you?
That's all very agreeable with me, and so long as his wife is there, then that's fine.
Okay, well, let me summarize and make sure that we've got clear what we've agreed to at this point, what you've agreed to at this point. And again, I really appreciate you working through this process. I know it's been an effort. What we have at this point is an agreement for the rent to be paid at $800 if, in fact, when Mrs. Armstrong looks at the disposal, she finds that it's not working, and Mr. Baker will be given a credit for going out and purchasing the faucet and the disposal and installing that at his expense. And the other point that's been made and decided upon by both of you is that in the future, when you're dealing with concerns or problems about the property, that Mr. and Mrs. Baker will come together to deal with Mrs. Armstrong. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. Okay. You know, I made some notes, a little list of what issues were on the table, and the one that hasn't been addressed is the issue of Christopher and his friends and the broken window. And I'm wondering how you'd like to go about addressing that issue. I know there was some disagreement as to the facts, and I'm thinking that what you might like to do at this point is put on the table a variety of options and maybe brainstorm how you'd like to resolve that.
Why don't we ask Christopher? He's an honest boy. He's not going to lie to us.
Okay. So one possibility would be for the two of you together. Is that what you're suggesting?
That'd be all right.
With his wife.
With Mrs. Baker to talk to Christopher. Okay, that's one possibility.
I'd like that to be at my house.
Okay, so one option that's on the table is for the Mr. and Mrs. Baker and Mrs. Armstrong to get together with Christopher and ask him what happened.
At my house.
Okay, at Mrs. Armstrong's house. Any other options?
Well, Mr. Baker can give me the $35 right now.
Okay, so you're saying if your concern is the window, and it is that you'd like to be paid the $35. So
I think that's fair.
Another option.
What if, assuming Christopher did it, and we ask him, what if he works it out some way?
Okay.
Because I don't want him to be raised that way.
So you're saying that in terms of your parental responsibility, you'd rather have him pay for the window if, in fact, he broke it. So another option is for him to do work for you. What do you think about that?
Oh, yes, I like that because there's no one to take care of the property since Charles died.
Okay. So there are things that you think Christopher might be able to do? Anybody have any ideas about what those might be?
Do you have anyone to do the grass yet?
No, I don't have anyone to do the grass.
Okay, so
That might
mowing
be-
the lawn might be one.
Yes. I generally paid about $5 a week, or Charles did, to have the grass mowed, and he could do that until it's all paid off.
Yeah, that'd be fine, and he could decide if he wanted to do it or if you wanted him to do it anymore after
To
that.
keep on doing it.
Okay, so it sounds like based on a resolution to this particular issue that the two of you along with Mrs. Baker would meet with Christopher this evening at Mrs. Armstrong's house. Did we talk about doing it today?
Well, this evening,
I think
I
that
would
would be
just as soon
fine.
do it as soon as we can.
You have to do it
Yeah.
before I go to work.
Yeah.
I go to
Okay.
work at 11, so could we meet at 9 or something? My wife will be there then,
Mm-hmm. Well,
too.
right after dinner, 7:30 would be good. I go to bed early, so that would...
7:30, okay for you?
Yeah.
Okay, so the resolution to this particular issue is that the three of you would meet with Christopher, come up with or have a discussion with him about what happened, and make some decisions about if he's responsible, how he would work out paying it for the window either in cash or through labor. And one option that you can discuss at that point is mowing the lawn at $5 per time.
That's fine.
Okay. Is there anything else about that issue or anything else we've discussed that we need to go through at this point?
I don't think of anything.
Before we conclude the mediation, I'd like to help you nail down the specific terms of what it is you've both agreed to. You both agreed that $800 or $900 in rent is owing, but that there's a credit for the replacement of the faucet in the amount of $30. Is that right? But that the credit for the replacement of the garbage disposal of $70, is that going to be taken into account next month, or how do you want to handle that?
Well, I think as soon as we decide. If I come over and I find that it really is broken and it wasn't them that did it, then he can have the $70 back.
Okay. And you're willing to make payment right now for the balance, the $870, and she'll give you the additional $70.
Back if,
Yeah, tonight if it looks all right.
Is that okay?
That's okay.
Okay.
It's okay.
And how would you like to arrange payment? Are you prepared to pay in cash or by check?
I'll write a check. It's what we always do when
I'll
we pay
write
the
a
rent.
check. I always like a receipt on these things.
Okay, so you're both going to write personal checks, and that's okay with both of you. And you're going to do that before you leave today for the rent amount of $870, and later this evening for the disposal amount of $70.
If
Everything works
right.
out. Okay. And you've agreed to a specific time to get together this evening at Mrs. Armstrong's house to meet with Christopher. That's at 7:30, and Mr. and Mrs. Baker and Christopher will be there. And we've discussed the options that you're going to present to him, and that there's going to be a discussion with him about whether in fact he broke the window. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. And then the only other meeting that I have in my mind that needed to be set up was an opportunity for Mrs. Armstrong to actually inspect the disposal. And when did you want to do that?
That was going to happen tonight, too, right?
Right.
Okay, you want to do that earlier, later?
Could we just at the end when we meet at your house?
Yes, let's do it then.
You'll just walk back next
Right.
door with them. Okay. Are there any other specifics of the agreement that we need to talk about at this point, or is that pretty clear to both of you?
Well, that he's going to knock on the door and wait till I answer.
Okay. And that's okay with you?
That's fine, and my wife will be with me, I can assure you.
Okay. Anything else?
No, that's it.
Okay. Again, I want to thank you both for coming today. I think this has been a really successful mediation. You've both worked hard to work through some difficult issues and come to a positive resolution for both of you, I hope. And I hope that in the future, if you have disputes or conflicts, that you'd be willing to try mediation again. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
you.